Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Bostic, and I am first and foremost the proud parent and humble servant of King James, who was my medically complex child. And my day job, I am the Assistant Director of the Division for Children and Youth with Special Health Needs at the Department of Public Health in the state of Massachusetts. And I am here with my colleague, Valeria Pedersen. Val, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Valeria Peterson, and I am the project director for the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. And I'm also a caregiver myself in my personal life, and I'm raising neurodivergent children, and just very happy to be here.
So Val and I are really excited to be here and to talk with you about the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, a community of caregiving rooted in shared experience. We wanted to start out with kind of giving you an idea of how this idea of a caregiver to caregiver respite network came to be. As I mentioned before, I had the lived experience of being a caregiver of a medically complex child, or a child who is part of what we call a group of kids with children with special health needs. And for those who may not be familiar, children with special health needs, or SHIN as I affectionately call them, are kids with chronic conditions that impact them either physically, developmentally, behaviorally, and or emotionally. And so having had my son James, who what became disabled as a result of severe jaundice, we went from being a family of having a son with who was perfectly healthy to one who was severely disabled. So James became nonverbal, non-ambulatory, G-tube fed, and hearing impaired. And to say that he turned my world upside down would be an understatement. And as you'll see his picture here, and it was from an article that the Federation for Children with Special Needs has, it says that, as a single parent and a primary caregiver of King James, I am all too familiar with the challenges that caregivers of children with youth and special health needs face every day. And part of what's really challenging about our situation is we rarely get a break. And you often hear this term, high burden of care. James was never a burden, but the care that was involved in taking care of him was very, very significant and impacted multiple things in terms of work, in taking care of my other daughter, and life in general. So as I was going along the journey of being a caregiver to King James, I started pursuing my executive MBA at Suffolk University. And it was there in the public policy class that I had an opportunity to really dive into why is it so hard to find supports for our families for respite in their homes and communities. And as we know, during the pandemic in particular, the workforce crisis for direct service providers that already existed before the pandemic actually became more significant. And so we found that there were families who were suddenly stuck at home, not able to actually get any kind of support and never getting a break. And I lived through this myself personally. And so as I was pondering this, I started to think about the business case. Like, what is it that we can do to help businesses understand why this is such an important issue? The other thing that was really striking to me was learning that the bulk of the advocacy that happens for respite in general tends to happen for caregivers who are supporting elder care. And having done that as well, I understood the significance of it. But very often people don't see our families. So I started talking about this with our business roundtable and with other business leaders around the impact of not having respite for families of children with youth and special health needs. Families are reported to have lower productivity in work as a result of their caregiving. Over 80% of our families report that. Right? And as a result, there is sometimes a forced change in employment. And as I was looking at the statistics, I heard more and more of myself reflected in them. 60% of people who have children with special health needs end up changing employment status or actually leaving the workforce altogether because they're not able to actually balance the needs. So this impacts our employability. And then we looked at the statistics in terms of lost income, and families across the country, which are 1 in 4 families, are losing $17 billion in lost income nationally because of lack of productivity and inability to work. So when we started looking at the impact on employers, employers are losing a good $25.2 billion worth of productivity nationally. That's because of turnover, absenteeism, and presenteeism. And in Massachusetts, caregivers of children with special health needs, that equates to about $573 million per year. Well, one would think that that would be enough, but then when you think about this, if people are not able to work as a state, we're losing talent and we're also losing income. So our tax base is impacted, and as a result, we can't actually provide the services that we need for our families to be able to have the kinds of supports that we're needing. As I was thinking about this dilemma, I started thinking about my own experience again, and something occurred to me, and that was that during the times that I didn't have supports for James, I often would reach out to another caregiver and say, hey, I really need your help with just watching James for a little while so that I can go and do whatever it is I needed to do. And part of the reason I could do that was because I knew that they had children with similar profiles and they understood how to take care of James. And so I created my own little network, similar to what people did during the pandemic of creating their pods for safety and health, right? And then it occurred to me, well, wait, if I can do that for myself, why not also do that for families across the state? And so out of that came this idea of the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network. And the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network is actually modeled after the P2P model, which many people are familiar, the parent to parent model, a successful evidence-based methodology where parents refer information and share success and challenges with each other so that they can actually not have to recreate the wheel. So the other thing that was really important to think about was that, one of the reasons why this was so exciting is that caregivers are, in fact, a skilled workforce. We do this work every single day. So what we're doing with the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, or what we affectionately call C2C, is tapping into a fully trained workforce and matching them with each other to provide respite to each other. So what we're doing is matching people with similar profile needs. You may have a child who has autism with a particular way that manifests for them. And based on those support needs, we match them with another child or another family who has a child with a similar profile, which is really exciting because that meant no matter what the disability, whether it was physical, developmental, behavioral, or emotional, or a combination of all of those, we could match people up based on those lived experiences. It was also really important to me to make sure that compensation did not become a barrier for families. Having lived in South America as an exchange student in high school, I understood what it was like to be in a foreign country, not understand the language, not understand the culture, having to navigate systems. All I had to do was navigate school, but families come into this country and they have to learn how to navigate our systems of care. So in addition to using private pay or leveraging PCA hours that hadn't been used, we also have in-kind exchange for bartering. So what we actually do is we match families with each other, and we ask them to then talk with each other about what the needs are of their children. And so they actually do the training, they do the actual direction of how long it will be, how much it will cost, what are the needs. And all that was required as I was studying this and putting this together for my capstone were two things: a registry for families to actually input all of this information, and a family engagement specialist, preferably in multiple languages so that we could be assured that that language was not a barrier, could actually help to make those matches. Serendipitously, right after I presented my capstone, some money came into the state of Massachusetts, $20 million, to actually do respite innovation grants. And so the Federation for Children with Special Needs actually submitted a proposal to implement my idea so that we could actually create this statewide network. And they were granted $1.2 million to implement the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, which is super exciting. So I'm going to pass this over to my colleague and I should say compatriot in the battlefield, if you will, my partner in crime, Val Peterson, who's going to tell you how this has been implemented.
Thank you, Beth. We are so delighted to introduce to you today the Caregiver to Caregiver Respite Network, which, as Beth has mentioned, is a project of the Federation for Children with Special Needs. The C2C network is a statewide network of families who have children with disabilities, specialized support needs, medically complex needs, or mental health challenges. Caregivers get matched with each other to provide a short break from caregiving, or as we call it in the professional world, respite. Caregivers who participate in our program are Massachusetts residents who are primary caregivers of children and youth with special health care needs and disabilities between the ages of 0 to 26. Now let's talk about how C2C matches are made. There are 3 criteria that we primarily focus on, and the number 1 is, of course, the child's or youth's medical and support needs. We want to match caregivers who have very similar support experience with their children. Additionally, we also look at where the caregivers are located, as geographical proximity of caregivers is very important in our program. Frequently, we find that transportation or access to a community-based agency can be a huge barrier in finding services. And so we want to remove this barrier by connecting families who are located within no more than a 30-minute drive from one another. And then another important match consideration is the language and cultural identities of our caregivers. We are very intentional about making our matches based on what the caregivers have communicated to us as their language or cultural preferences. So now let's dive into the program process steps or match steps. The first step is in our participation is filling out the match request form, which can be found on FCSN's website, fcsn.org/C2C. And the next step, once the match form has been filled out, would be scheduling an intake call with one of our program coordinators. The intake call can be done either by phone or virtually. It's usually a 30-minute call during which one of our team members will go over any additional information about the caregiver's child that needs to be shared, their experiences in supporting the child, and also answer any of the questions that the caregiver might have about the program. Following the intake call, the program coordinator will invite a caregiver to complete their background check. The background check is done for each program participant, regardless of whether they want to receive or provide respite. We utilize CORI, or Criminal Offender Record Information, and SORI, or Sexual Offender Record Information checks. Both of these background checks are done to make sure that we can establish a trusting relationship between caregivers. The results of the background checks are completely confidential. They do not get shared anywhere outside of our organization. And neither of the background checks reveal immigration status, which can be a very important factor for many of our families. In addition to the background check, C2C staff will also perform reference checks by connecting with 2 individuals whom the caregiver listed on their match request application. And these individuals could be a family member, a colleague, a neighbor, or anyone who can speak to the caregiver's personal qualities and their caregiving abilities and experience. Once the background checks have been completed and the references have been connected with, an invitation to register for one of our upcoming orientation sessions will be sent to the caregiver, and also they will be invited to set up an account on our learning platform. The learning platform offers our participants access to additional resources and trainings around respite that were curated by our program staff, and gives them an opportunity to join some discussions with other caregivers, as we offer a discussion board on the learning platform, so they can connect with others who are also part of the C2C network. As a next step, the program coordinator will start searching our database for the best possible match or connection for the caregiver, and will notify them as soon as that connection has been identified. And once the potential match has been identified, that's when the program coordinator will schedule and facilitate a virtual meet and greet between the caregivers to make sure they get introduced and they can ask each other some additional questions and see if this is the right match for them. Following the introduction call, it will be up to the matched caregivers to set up their respite opportunities in the way that makes sense to both of them. Our program coordinators will still be available for additional questions. They will check in with the caregivers, typically via a survey that will be sent out 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and 3 months following the match connection. One of the other things that we frequently talk to families about is, as Beth has touched upon, is compensation options within the program. So, as we have mentioned, reciprocity is absolutely key to the success of C2C Network, and it is our primary way of achieving this success. So we use in-kind exchange as a primary way to provide and receive respite. It involves providing an equal amount of time in respite to another caregiver as one has received. We also get a lot of questions around one of our other compensation options, which is Personal Care Attendant Program, or PCA, which is available through Massachusetts state-funded health insurance, or Mass Health. Some of the families we work with may be eligible for PCA and may have already accessed that support. For those families who are not familiar with the PCA program and would like to learn more, we always recommend going on mass.gov to find more information and also see the eligibility criteria and the application process. And then last but not least, we also offer private pay as one of the compensation options. It is very straightforward. Caregivers decide what the pay rate might be and how many hours of respite they might need and what days they might be able to receive respite. Developing culturally responsive and equitable project materials and also making sure that all of our activities are offered with the language equity lens has been one of our biggest priorities. That's why C2C has 5 bilingual project coordinators that support families in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. We also have access to the language line through the Federation for Children with Special Needs, and we can provide interpretation in other languages, including access to American Sign Language, or ASL. And in addition to that, we translate all of our materials and always try to ensure language capacity to support our diverse families. Our program officially launched on February 5th, 2024, and as you can see on the slide, some most updated match data is available. About 60% of our match requests are in English. However, we do have all of our other languages represented as well, and we're hoping that those numbers continue to grow as C2C continues to evolve and expand as a program. So in addition to our program languages, we've also had match requests come in Arabic and Vietnamese. And at this moment, we have 14 matched caregivers, and the languages that they speak are English, Chinese, Korean, and Haitian Creole.